Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the library tour of Doom. This is a library tour of all of my books that's being conducted by Lord Ganesha and myself. We're doing a book a day, whether we feel like it or not, forever. And today we're going back to 1909. We're going back to a little book by a famous author that is a book that a lot of people that I've met in my life didn't know the author wrote. This is Mark Twain. This is his book, Is Shakespeare Dead? And it's in its bare bones, it is a little novella-length thing about what happens when one great author dissects the existence of another great author. It's done with humor and warmth, but this is Mark Twain taking up his lifelong, by the time he wrote this book, he had been thinking about this subject for 50 years or more, took up his lifelong suspicion that the man from Stratford-upon-Avon, William Shakespeare, did not write the works that we attribute to William Shakespeare, that he couldn't have done it, that somebody else had to do it. It was a lively topic in Twain's own day. It wasn't too much before this, only about 50 years before this, that Delia Bacon wrote her firebrand book on Shakespeare and set forth the idea that it was Sir Francis Bacon that wrote the plays of Shakespeare. And Twain starts off, after a lengthy autobiographical preamble about his days on the river as a pilot, as a cub pilot. He starts off with something along those lines, and that has led people, many people who haven't read this book but have at least heard about it, to mistakenly say that this is just Twain's full-throated defense of the Baconian theory. The publishers of this particular edition of the work strengthened that impression by putting Shakespeare and Bacon at the front. But really, it's not that. Really, it's just Twain examining the whole subject, at least as far as it was known in his own day. He takes up all the different candidates, the omniscient genius of Bacon, reflected in the many, many different kinds of specialized knowledge that are reflected in the plays of William Shakespeare, the grandiosity of the lines, the grandiosity of the poetry in Shakespeare's work, reflected in the work of Christopher Marlowe, the incredible coincidences in the actual events in the life of Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, that are reflected in the plays of Shakespeare. He goes at each one of those candidates in turn. But his main object in this little book, which is very, very enjoyable, like everything else this author wrote, it's very, very enjoyable. His main object in this book is not so much to raise up a candidate as it is to say that from what we actually know about the man from Stratford-on-Avon, he couldn't have written the plays that we attribute to him. That from what we actually know, it's the hugest leap in the world to say without any doubt that he did. He gets a great deal of fun out of the fact that we don't have any first-hand actual evidence that Shakespeare ever wrote a play. We don't have any first-hand evidence that he ever went to school. We have a tiny handful of signatures that look like the signatures of either a very unwell person or an illiterate person, and Shakespeare's family was all illiterate. As many anti-Stratfordians have said in the century since this book came out, Shakespeare is one of the only major literary figures in any canon that had illiterate children, and of course famously does not mention any kind of literary production in his will, which is a document that we do have. Doesn't mention any books, doesn't mention anything like editions or anything like that. And also, Stratford-upon-Avon is silent on the subject of Shakespeare until long after his death. Completely silent. And every single hayrick has been scoured for any hint of a document. And there aren't any. There aren't any at all, except legal documents that show that the William Shakespeare who lived there after, we're supposed to believe, a career writing the greatest plays in all of literature in London, that show that William Shakespeare involved in petty financial disputes, and having apparently forsaken literature completely, one way or another. There's a lot, as Twain says over and over again in this book. There's a huge amount of conjecture that goes into any normal canonical biography of Shakespeare, and he mostly in this book pokes fun at that conjecture, and sort of summarizes all the ground it needs to cover, and it's terrific. It's a terrific performance. It's very much a performance. This is not an anti-Stratfordian book. There are plenty of them, and plenty of them get down into as many details as they can. A lot of those details get blown out of the water. Shakespeare has far more eloquent and convincing defenders of his status as an author than detractors. And Twain isn't writing that kind of a book. This is not Shakespearean scholarship at all. This is instead a great writer taking cudgels to another great writer. In fact, Twain makes it explicit at one point in this book by saying that, it's been 50 years or more, a long time, since I was a boy in Hannibal, Missouri. But I bet there are people there who still remember me. And I bet if I were to die tomorrow, Hannibal, Missouri would be abuzz with that fact. They would be abuzz with that. It wouldn't take 7 years until the first folio appears. It wouldn't take a century or half a century until somebody decides to go there and maybe look for records. It would happen right away. That Hannibal, Missouri would have known in his own day that it had a famous son and would have acted accordingly. And the Shakespeare surmisers, Twain refers to them as troglodytes, have from time immemorial said, well, the reason why that didn't happen is because he just wrote plays. And so nobody thought that was important. I've never understood that myself. No one else in Stratford-upon-Avon wrote plays that were the talk of London. And we know that Shakespeare did, and we know that his plays were. It's a singular thing. You would comment on it, I think, but one way or another. That's just on the surface what happens in this book. As is the case in so many Mark Twain books, there's something else going on underneath the surface that is, that's all great fun. The Shakespeare authorship controversy just in general is great fun. And Twain's handling of it is great fun. There are huge passages in here that you should read aloud. You really should. Quite a bit of Mark Twain, when he's got a little steam under him, quite a bit of it should be read aloud. And there's a wonderful one-man stage play by a Canadian named Kira Cutler. If I remember, I'll leave a link to it down below. I believe there's a very clean YouTube video of his one-man stage play called "Is Shakespeare Dead?", in which he's a dramatist and he takes this book and constructs a stage-worthy performance out of it, using mostly 99.9% its own text, and it's a masterful job. It's just wonderful. And the best thing about, I think I mentioned that video on this channel before, the best thing about it is that it shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mark Twain is still funny. In hands that are talented, he can still get a laugh out of an auditorium. But that part is fun. I'm not underselling that at all. But there's something else going on here. Something deeper is going on here, and that is Mark Twain taking the wind out of scholarly conjecture just in general, and by extension, faith. This meditation is couched in a broader meditation about pretenders. Any kind of pretender, whether it's Perkin Warbeck pretending to the English throne, or Satan pretending to the realm of heaven, pretending to the governance, to the throne of heaven. Twain wants to look at those pretenders, yes, okay, and that's a good pretext for talking about pretenders to the mantle of Shakespeare, or the Stratford man being a pretender to the author of the plays. But deeper than that, Twain wants to examine in this book, not in any systematic way, this is mostly a lark. He wants to examine, though, how that happens, and what the connection of pretenders are to faith. Among the many pretenders that he mentions is Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of the Christian Science Church, a favorite punching bag of his. And he brings it around in the end to that bigger discussion, to the case for Shakespeare, and it works wonderfully. I I uh, I can only assume that one of the reasons why this book isn't better studied, isn't better known. I've never seen a paperback of it. I this copy is from 1909. I've never seen a common reprint of this. Sometimes you'll find it buried in a 1,000 page volume of collected essays or something like that of Mark Twain, but almost never otherwise. I've seen many volumes that call themselves the complete Mark Twain that don't have this and contain no allusion to it. And I have to assume that part of the reason for that is maybe a kind of schoolroom embarrassment, like the kind you might have felt if two teachers were fighting with each other in front of you. I don't know what the reason would be otherwise. I've also heard contentions largely made by people who haven't read this book that the reason it's never mentioned is because it's weak. Well, Mark Twain wrote some weak stuff, and it is all mentioned. This thing tends to be systematically removed from a list of his works. I don't get that, but I recommend it. I recommend this book if you can ever find a copy, uh, and probably, despite what I just said, probably this is available on Project Gutenberg or LibriVox or something like that. Probably you can get this. Probably, if you find it, you'll find it again ensconced, just buried in that much huger collected essays, almost to draw attention away from it. I think it deserves to stand as a book on its own. It's very good, and it's your book for today in the Library Tour of Doom. There will be no other videos today. Uh, but I wanted to get one in because I like seeing your face, and so does Lord Ganesha, although he won't admit it. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.